That sound good, Eddie? Eddie Bucky Man? That sound okay? That sound better? Yeah, that sound better. Yeah. What chapter are we on tonight? Huh? 5. Now, I do want you to know, I know I posted some stuff on from BID, FTA, and everything I buy is for Donna. But I bought her a $1,900 Lazy Boy electric rocker recliner for $52. Brand new, in the box, in the plastic. Do what? $52 for a $1,900 Lazy Boy rocker recliner. I bought a 65-inch TV for the back to go back here. It was $799, and I got it for like just a little over $100, brand new, LG. It even looks at the security people and Jim Lehman. It would point at him and say, "Go sit down." Jim ain't here tonight, is he? But the site is called BID, FTA. And you name it, they have it. Every week there's something different. There's different things. No, I put it up here in the pulpit and I show people. It was almost a $2,000. It's called, we have smart everything. We even have a smart coffee cup. I bought Donna a smart toilet. It's a bidet. It's a bidet. It's got a heated seat. You push your foot in front of it and it lifts the lid. Do it again, it lifts the seat. It's got a heated seat. It's got heated water to wash you and massage you. And I'm serious. I'm dead serious. But I bought her a spigot for the kitchen, and I got under there and I lay on a padded deal, and it feels like I pulled my hip out. That was just a spigot. I'm afraid to deal with those toilets. It may put me in my grave. But there's several here. And it was Brandon that introduced me. For men, they may have axles for your car. They've got fifth wheel hookups that go in your truck. They've got, you name it, they have it, period. And it's up here at Rogers. It's called BID, B-I-D, FTA. Oh, it's fun. Do what?
Thursday school graduation at 6:30.
All right. We'll announce that. Yeah, Thursday Bible school. The kids need to be here a little bit earlier. They need snacks. And of course, Mary Sue can attest to this. Some of these people don't come for snack. They come for a meal. And whatever you've got, they load the plate up. They don't care there's 100 people behind them. And so TBS will be tomorrow night at 6:30 here at the building. So be mindful of that. And if you want to get into that bit FTA, if you talk to me afterwards, I'll introduce you to it. They got everything from tools. They've got greenhouses. Do what? No guns. Thank goodness. All right, please do not forget. And I know that sometimes, we'll come to something that may apply to me but not others. But this digital parenting will start Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday morning. He'll speak to us. And he may even mention on there that you can get into adults, you can get into trouble if you're on a bidding site. But let me tell you what, our cell phones, and it was like Bob said, when you see Mabusa, and with Mabusa you stop, any vehicle has to stop you at the bottom of the mountain, and they walk up the mountain, they got 10 buildings, and sitting up on there's a little old solar panel, this big that charges their cell phones. They are amazing. You may have been here when we had Mabusa, and he was direct from Uganda, and he was talking to us, and I think maybe we had to record it because of the internet problems we were having. So the cell phones can be phenomenal, but they also can be very, very dangerous. And there are addictions that people get hooked on. So it's not just the kids. We need to know, about cell phones and parenting kids with cell phones. All right, there is a table wedding shower out there for a sweet couple that were married here and baptized him, Matthew and Swana. Bob and John E. Ping says thank you for all the cards, the letters, the prayers that they're getting. You got the senior graduation, and I'd suggest if you are the parent of any graduating senior, you empty that box every time you're here in this building. Most people put cash money in it, and there's a lot of traffic comes through this building, so empty their trays. Yeah. So just be mindful of that. Joe was doing a little bit better, but still hurting. I talked to Neil, and I talked about you, Jim, and I repent. Well, it's live, so you can go see what I said. I told him I had a smart TV that when you're walking around out there, it'll tell you go sit down, even point at you. And do keep in your prayers Sister LaDonna. It was good to hear that Neil has done some work from home. And obviously when you're away from it so long and you've got the brain and that you have to retrain, but he said he was doing better, so keep them in your minds. Don't forget your green sheet. Then we've got the bulletin. And don't forget Thursday Bible School tomorrow night, 6:30. Yes. All right, Ernie Penn had a stroke, and he's in a regular room now, or? or rehab. So, being a nice to you. So keep Ernie in your prayers. I always enjoyed Ernie. All right, in chapter 10, let's read verses 1 through 10. This is, chapter 4, 1 through 10. Is that where that's where, I had a teacher, Brother Samuels, he'd come to class at Lipscomb, and he'd say, he wouldn't say, now, where do we stop in the Bible? Because he taught the restoration through the scriptures. He'd say, what illustration was I on? And so he had an illustration for every passage of scripture. Lamentations, chapter 4, verses 1 through 10. And one of the things that you can notice here is the very idea that Jeremiah, being the writer, we think, was able to look at his people and associate with what they were going through because he had been through it. And so tonight we're talking about the suffering of the siege, these Jewish people, and how bad it got. You've seen movies about, and some of it, did any of you live through the Great Depression? What was that, in the 20s? 30s? And you watch, what people had to do for a meal, what they had to do, when they, and a lot of people from the South moved to the North simply to find a job. And then when they retired, they would move, a lot of them would move back. That was the experience that we had in Alabama. And so these people, one thing that captures your attention in this is how unnatural and what punishment, and the punishment that God gave these people was what? Did you read 4?
What punishment he gave them?
Yeah. In chapter 4.
That their enemies were over them.
Okay.
I think, in my mind, that when I was reading it, it seemed like they were under siege in the city.
Mm-hmm.
So there was nothing coming in and going out. And then you had the mother pulling their babies for food and stuff like that. It ain't good.
Famine. And what did you say, Mike? Starvation. And so what you notice here is how unnatural this situation was and what it caused the people to do. And so in verses 1, how the gold has grown dim. We watched an old series that we used to really enjoy. What was it called, Donna? Where they go back in time and... I don't know. Who? But anyway, what happened was... I don't think that... It was an old black and white. And that one common... Time tunnel? And they went back in time, and what he did... several of them came up with a plan to steal gold bars. And so they stole millions of dollars, and then they went back to the future. And by then, gold had lost its value. It was worth nothing. Yeah, there you go. The Twilight Zone. Have you ever wondered? God talks about the street of gold being what? In heaven there'll be a street of gold that will be transparent. It is so pure. And there what he's doing, he's conjuring our mind up. Our money system used to be, I don't know if it still is, backed by gold. And so he uses these expressions. When you think about gold, and remember, these are poems. When you think of gold, you think of what? Rich, shiny, valuable. And so here what he's talking about, that which is valuable has grown dim. If you look at it, there's one way that they could grow dim, and that is that gold had lost a lot of its value, or that it was just so covered with dust that it was dirty.
Or in a time of famine, it wouldn't be worth anything because there was nothing to buy.
Right. And like I said, remember that these are poems. And so how the gold had grown dim could even be talking about the great boulders of the temple, again, being valuable. How the pure gold is changed. The holy stones, being those of the temple, lie scattered at the head of every street. How many of you have been to the Yap Islands? I mean, if you're taking a cruise, Keith, you've got to go to the Yap Islands. It is now run by the Americans. But what they did, they have giant round stones. You know, the smaller ones you think of, well, that's a nickel. And by small, I mean like this. And the large ones, 6 feet. And so Scott Harper and I had gone to the Yap Islands, and we were over there taking pictures. We'd have our arm up on the stones. And the police department came by and informed us that it was against the law to touch those stones. But as they were bringing them from the Micronesian islands to Yap, which is below Guam in the Philippine Sea, the canoes would tip over. I mean, these are solid stones, carved out with holes in the middle, and they had lost their lives trying to transport what was valuable to them. Another thing that amazed me, how many of you leave $500 out in the yard? You know, so when you're close to the communal downtown area, they have these stones set up. But when you start getting out of the town, these things are laying in weeds in people's yards. And I think, well, they don't think that much of them. And so here you find the holy stones, that which was valuable to them. I mean, when you see the stones, they're thinking about their holy temple. He said in verse 2, and the precious sons of Zion, sons of Jerusalem, worth their weight in fine gold, how they are regarded as earthen pots, and the work of the potter's hand. If you go back to the book of Genesis, and we'll look at this in just a minute, you're talking about a people and these princes that used to be dressed in purple. Genesis says that they used to eat royal delicacies. And now, look at the change. The precious sons of Zion, worth their weight in fine gold, they were royal. How they are regarded as now earthen pots. What do you do when you break a pot? I mean, a clay pot. Just throw it away. And so they've gone to being this of worth of great price. How many people do we know about? And that's one thing I hate about Facebook. I could not care less about celebrities. I couldn't care about so-and-so losing his money because he did this. And things like that. I'm like John. There's a whole lot on there. I could not care less. I wish you had the choice of saying, I don't want to see this garbage. But you know, at times they were worth $1 million. You got football players that are that way. They've made millions. And now, they're broke. And so at one time they were worth. But now, nah. In Scuba, Mississippi, you have a university there called the University of Last Chance, where if you were playing for, let's just say, Florida, and there was one that we watched, and he went into a bar and his girlfriend was in there with another man, and he punched him out, slapped his girlfriend, and of course he was expelled from the Florida school. And the university there at Scuba would take people like that, try and rehabilitate them, and find them either work or a place to go play. And so without the university there at Scuba, there was no hope for them. And so when they would say, oh, we've got you someone from such and such a university, they want you to come play. No, I don't want to play for them. I want to play for Arkansas Razorbacks or Alabama. And they're thinking, and they're saying, do you not realize if you don't accept this, you... And here's what they do. Because of their pride and their arrogance, they go back to their little town where they were heroes, and they become drug dealers. So at one time, they were headed to be gold. And now they're nothing more than just a broken pot to be discarded. And so these are the pictures that the writer here is trying to get into our heads. And then he gets into some things that's just, it is so unnatural. Before we get into that, have you ever known of a child that was abused? And I'm not talking about miss a meal and go to your room. I'm talking about being locked in a closet for weeks. Badly abused. There was a family of 5 in Birmingham, Alabama. And they were all on government-assisted money. They had about 7 children between them. They all lived together. And what they would do at nighttime, and they never used the money for the children, they would go out partying every single night in Birmingham, Alabama. And they came home one night, and 3 of the children had frozen to death. How in the world? And you got people now, they'll leave a 3-year-old with a 7-year-old and call it babysitting. It's abuse. It is, what is the most natural thing for a mother? Donna talks to our kids and the cat with loving affection. And she don't talk to me like that. When I get off the phone, it's goodbye, sweetie, and, and all that sort of good stuff. But it's the most natural. Let something go on at the school with your child, and you watch the mother go down and deal with it. Don't send dad. And so now what the writer begins to talk about, which is not figurative language. These people were starving. John said, nothing in, nothing out. And here's what he says in verse 3. And there are 3 references here, going back to Deuteronomy, going back to Leviticus, and going back to Job, talking about these wild animals. But verse 3 says, even jackals. And be careful how you interpret that. Sometimes the way we've interpreted things are so far off base when it comes to animals. And sometimes we just don't know what they were. So even jackals, off of the beasts, they nurse their young. But the daughters of people has become cruel, like an ostrich in the wilderness. In the book of Job 39, it talks about the ostrich has abandoned their young. Was an ostrich a clean or a dirty bird? I'd hate to live in the Old Testament. You eat something, you say, man, that was good. And Mike comes along and says, oh, that's one of those bad ones. That's the dirty ones. The ostrich was dirty. Ostrich is just about always spoken of in a very negative way. And so these people knew that. There are people up north who think eating catfish is nasty because they're a bottom dweller. There ain't nothing like good catfish. And so these people are getting in their mind of this ostrich that abandons their young, and the mothers of these children are likened to a beast in a deserted place who just leaves their children. Man, you watch the movies of the Depression or poor people, and the mom and dad are sitting over there and they're giving the children the only food that they have to eat, and yet they'll go without to feed their children. That's the natural, that's the affectionate thing that mothers in this particular story would do for their children, but not here. And so the jackal offer the breast. They nurse their young, but the daughters of my people have become cruel, like the ostrich in the wilderness. The tongue of the nursing infant sticks to the roof of its mouth for thirst. The children beg for food, but no one gives to them. Those who once feasted on the delicacy, a reference back to the book of Genesis, perish in the street, and those who brought up in purple embraced ash heaps. Got a people that used to live in palaces, and now they're going to an incinerated dump trying to find food. Do we have situations like that in America? You know, a bunch of you fixing to go to Kiana. Is that it? Kiana? In Arizona? And you get to see, you know, they make billions of dollars in casinos. And recently, over $5 billion in untaxed cigarettes. Do you see that sort of living down there, Jeff? Mm-hmm. And that's typical of so many of them there, just abandoned. Flip-flops. And listen, you can go to Bargain Brothers and you can buy flip-flops for $1. It's like, ask the folks that go to Arizona, what do these people really want? And get it. A lot of the times what I do is when I get something from BidFid that Donna doesn't want, and I'm able to sell it, and I'll send the money to Africa. It's just the way that God blesses us. But you got a people that were raised in palaces, probably the Nazarite. And now, I mean, they're searching through a garbage pit. Where do you see that? Honduras. And a lot of time when a place like that in South America is hit with a hurricane, there's nothing. And a lot of what America sends, and I know this is true in Europe, before it ever gets to the people, it's been absconded by those that are responsible for distributing it or getting it out to where it needs to be. And so here you've got a child whose tongue is sticking to the roof of its mouth because it has nothing. And not only that, there was no one there to share. Food trains. When someone's sick in this congregation, or we know, we've worked outside of the congregation, people always help. God said, I've never seen my people beg for bread. And so you've got these children being abandoned by their parents. And I don't know. What would you do if you were in a situation of starvation with your family? I was reading of a story of a family that were truly in need. And he would go into a fish store and steal fish simply to feed his family. And the owner of the store told him he didn't need to do that. He didn't need to feel good. If he would just come ask, he would donate the food. And so it's so unnatural to see what's going on here. They had been a royal people. They had been a rich people. They've been a blessed people. And man, how things changed. The chastisement of the daughters of my people has been greater than the punishment of Sodom. Why did he have to bring up Sodom?
God's anger was dealt out towards Sodom. They died, so they didn't suffer. This is worse because they're suffering under God's anger.
All right, it was a story that the ancient Israelites knew, and they knew it well. Now, if you go over to the book of Ezekiel 16, and I made this statement before when I was telling John about it, we are such a sexually oriented people and nation that when we think of Sodom and Gomorrah, what do we think about? The what? Las Vegas. I don't know that anything has been as worse. When you've got from the oldest to the youngest, men practiced homosexuality. And we think about that. Whereas in the book of Ezekiel 16, he talks about that they were a greedy people. They had no compassion for the poor. They were not a hospitable people. People of Indonesia will look more at Ezekiel 16 because hospitality is vitally important to them. And so if you're not hospitable, I mean, it makes you cringe. And by the way, when God talks about this, you put the both together. What were they condemned for? Ezekiel 16 and Genesis. You put it all together. That's why it wasn't this or this. The homosexual group will say, well, you need to look at Ezekiel 16. Here's why they were condemned. This is why they were burned up. No, it was both of them. Both of them are called an abomination. And so he uses this story that I mean, they knew about it. It gets inside of them. And like John said, How could it be worse? Sodom and Gomorrah. Were they God's children? Were they Gentiles? Were they heathens? They were heathens. Didn't practice, didn't know a whole lot, were not in a covenant relationship with God. And so, if they had have known God's will, and brethren, there are some things that are natural laws that humanity does know. The reason that it was worse for Jerusalem is, number one, they knew, they rebelled, they were in a covenant relationship with God. And again, it was quick. Some will even use the expression, by the sword, death by the sword. Donna's daddy had worked for South Central Bell all of his life, never had a day off. And they had to pay him for 465 days. We got the message. We were living in Florida, and we shot on up here and found out that the cancer didn't start where they thought it did. It was just all over. And he died very, very quickly. There were a lot of problems when I talked to Josh, and he would talk about, having to get granddaddy up and take him to the bathroom and clean him up and stuff like that. But there was, as far as I know, Don, there was not a lot of pain, was there? Just mainly tired. Opposed to, some of you have been through it, some are going through it. But day after day after day, sitting and nursing a family member, it robs you. It robs you mentally, it robs you physically. We hurt so bad for so long. And so this is the reason Jerusalem's punishment was far more severe, because it was slow and it was enduring, even though in this chapter it says it will come to an end. Bob Beeler. Yeah, that got him awake. I mean, poor old Bob, and we've known about this. When you love to go to a doctor, and Bob, he would say to you and Darlene, here's the problem. Here's what we're going to do week 1, week 2, week 3. And by 2 months, you're going to be okay. You're going to be back. But every doctor you go to, until you don't know, you know so little until finally you think, no more doctors. One man said, and he went to prison, he said, I can stand it. He said, I've got 5 years. And it showed his calendar. He marked a day off at a time. But it was coming to an end, and he knew it. You can handle that. And so Jerusalem, his own children, didn't know when the end was going to come. And so he says that the chastisement there in verse 8, or verse 6, of the daughters of my people has been greater than the punishment of Sodom. Some people won't teach. Why? What does the Bible say about teachers, preachers? And Keith he brought that up in one of his classes. Do what? They're held to a higher standard or greater responsibility. And you've got to remember, there's not a teacher, there's not a preacher that is inspired. They're just doing the best they know to do. And so, these people knew they were in a relationship with God. And yet they just simply turned away from it, and God punished them for their faithlessness. I believe that if you have a talent, you ought to be using it for God. I told you once before in Tiptonville, and it was a congregation that got up to about 100 or 230 the time that we were there. But they had 5 sets of teachers, husbands and wives, that would not teach at church. They were worn out. And I understand it. Anyone in the workforce understands what it's like to be tired working. Now, I do believe that sometimes we are wrong in thinking, well, you need to go into full-time ministry. Wayne Carter was in full-time ministry at the bank. Jorge is in full-time ministry. John is in full-time ministry. Every one of us is. It's somehow that you've got to be a preacher or an associate or something to do with the church to be in full-time ministry. That's not true. Everybody ought to be living and being a testimony for the Lord. And so these people absolutely turned their back, and God said, all right, you ignore me, I'll ignore you. And God will turn his back on people. I don't know where we ever came up with this idea that he's always going to be there with open and loving hands. When you rebel against God, he'll turn his face against you. Isaiah 51. Which was overthrown in a moment. In other words, as John said, it was quick. And no hands were wrung for her. Her princes were pure, or purer than snow. And here he's talking about, I want you to think about people that work outside in the sun. What's the color of their skin? Is what? Brown, tan, darker, opposed to the lily skin of people like me who sit in an office. And here's what he's saying. This is what you used to look like. You used to be the lily of the field. And he starts using color, something that they would understand better than us. And by a redneck, I don't know why I look at Keith when I'm redneck. But where did that expression come from? Picking cotton, hoeing cotton, toting cotton, working outside on the railway is where that expression came from. They were hard-working outdoor people. And so now he starts using this color of their skin, her princes, and this would be a reference to the Nazarite. Their princes were purer than snow, whiter than milk. What expressions do we use like this today? Well, you look a little bit flushed today. I don't know, what does that mean? Young people say, well, I flush a toilet. Well, you look a little bit gray today. What does that mean? Do what? Look like death warmed over. And so you see now the comparison, not to the suffering back here, but what they used to look like and what they look like now. And so their lily white, their beautiful skin and their perfect bodies is an expression here of comparison. Their bodies were more ruddy than coral, and the beauty of their form was like sapphire, Not only they looked good, they had perfect bodies. And now their face is blacker than soot. Why? Their homes were gone, burned. They're searching through dumps to get something to eat. And so now they have lost this royal look. Their faces were blacker than soot. They are not recognized in the streets, and their skin has shriveled on their bones, and it has become as dry wood. My sister-in-law finally sent me a picture of Barry right before he died. Barry has never been athletic like me. He's always been very slender. He worked for a living. And man, when I saw that picture, I cannot get it out of my mind. The eyes sunk in, something like the Ethiopian children that starved to death. That's what he looked like. And the writer here is pointing towards that picture of what these people looked like. Their friends didn't even recognize them. When you think about that, who do you think about? Job. And Donna always makes fun about this. While the mother or the wife was at home, he was sitting at the gates. He would be an elder. He'd be an elder of the city. He'd be what we would consider to be a government worker. People would come to him just like they did David, and David would resolve their problems at the city gate. But he would turn black with disease. He'd scraped his skin with old pottage, and his friends didn't even recognize him. And so these people that were blessed under God became faithless, and they were worth nothing. Broken clay pots to be thrown away. But keep reading and look at the turn there. I did have a preacher who moved to a congregation in Guin, and he had 3 teenagers to die through the year, and most of it was like in car wrecks. One had cancer. And he said, Mike, I just cannot move the dark cloud that's over this congregation. And I don't know what you do. And so there was a dark cloud hanging over the church. And he finally resigned, and with the idea, well, maybe someone else more experienced can come in and do something here. But Job, you stop and think about the cloud that was over his life, the cloud now that God, the separation that came between God's children and God. So next week we will pick up, and if you forget where we picked up, just look for faces black as soot, and you'll be there. Thank you for your attention.